So welcome to another edition of Inside Jacobs Music Center. As we get closer to the opening of our wonderful hall in its renovation, we wanted to go a little bit deeper into the background of its recreation and some of the critical elements. Today, importantly, we have two members of the orchestra who were instrumental, pun intended, in the shaping of what this hall is becoming. So we're happy to have you, Richard Levine, who's been in the orchestra for 50 years and has been a leader of this orchestra during that entire time, member of the cello section, and Greg Cohen, 2008,
2008.
Principal percussionist. And percussion has a lot of needs in this, and we're going to get to some of those. But welcome, first of all, to both of you, and thank you for all the good work you've done on this hall. Kind of want to go back to the beginning. I mean, in the case, by the time you both became involved, we had selected the acoustician, Paul Scarborough, and the architects, HGA architects. But I remember a meeting of the whole orchestra in which the architects said, tell us what you need. Tell us what you have now that can be better. Tell us what you feel is important. And the orchestra all chimed in. And in fact, we're going to talk about some of those details, but every time they made a presentation, the architects started with the list of all of the things that the orchestra had said. And they accommodated and worked really hard to incorporate that. You were a very important part of this process. So do you remember that day and some of the things on the list?
I remember it very well. It was the first time we got, the planning had actually come very far along already before the orchestra saw any of the plans. And it was after that that Greg and I were elected to a committee to represent orchestras in the process. But it was a spectacular meeting, seeing the vision for the first time. And the orchestra, of course, had a lot of concerns about the current hall as it was then. And the onstage acoustics, hearing back and forth among sections, sight lines, backstage. There were a lot of concerns. The connection with the audience was one of them. Storage facilities, absolutely. There were myriad details that the orchestra weighed in on at that point.
I remember a moment when someone said, you know, there is all this space off stage and on the other side where there were kind of fire exits. And the architects had a little gleam in their eye because they did know about that.
For sure. And, you know, I think thinking back to that meeting, which took place, I think, just before the top of the pandemic, a little over 4 years now. Yeah. It's hard to think that far back. But yeah, you know, in thinking about the space that exists on both sides and trying to figure out how to best utilize that, and knowing full well that, you know, space has really been an issue, you know, for storage, certainly for percussion, but for many different, you know, different things. And so I think that became sort of one of the critical components of the backstage, you know, part of the project. And certainly during the meeting, various musicians spoke to that. Certainly I did, I recall. And I'm, you know, very excited about what's happened from that moment all the way looking forward to now, and how, you know, some of those things have come into realization.
14,000 square feet added in this interstitial space is kind of one of the miracles that most people will not see, but you will benefit from. And administrative staff, the library, of course, now has a much better facility. The stage is flat in its initial, you know, construct, but on that stage is a series of platforms, we call them risers, so that the instrument sections are separated, and for sight lines and for sound lines. And Richard was the architect of the risers, and the taskmaster, and the dreamer, and the measurer, and
and I will take all the flack for it.
I know. I honestly, glutton for punishment on that one. Percussion risers, automated percussion risers. Right. Talk about how that makes your life easier.
Right. So now we have a movable upstage or percussion lift, which is going to be just so beneficial to so many people. It's not the least of which is our stagehands. we can get the piano, the celeste, all the heavy equipment, the timpani, the mallet instruments, it can be rolled on, and then push of a button, it'll be put in position, which will just be fantastic. And the lift now is quite a bit deeper than the space that we previously had. So not only we'll have an ease of moving equipment on and off the riser, we actually have more depth now to set up equipment, which is just fantastic. Another sort of feature on both sides is a little bit of a notch was cut out of it. So we actually have a set of steps that we can open the stage door, walk up to the riser, very easily. They're much wider than what we used to have. And so we can much more easily, the flow of equipment on and off the stage, off the riser where we work, is going to be so much better than we previously had.
And they're solid. They feel really good to walk on.
Absolutely, yeah. The previous risers were a little bit creaky, and the whole thing is just one giant unit. And so it's very, very solid. And so when you're carrying equipment, and they put railing, of course, with the steps, and so you can hold on, there's a safety aspect, of course. And so you feel much more secure. I think we're going to feel much more secure, placing equipment back and forth. It's a constant flow all the time. So that makes a big deal for us. It makes a big difference.
And people may not appreciate how much equipment the percussion section often has to deal with different repertoire on the same program.
That's right. And inevitably there's only, X amount of stage space, and you don't really know all the time what you're going to end up using. So you make a best guess, what pair of cymbals, what snare drums, this and that. But inevitably throughout the course of rehearsals, you need to switch equipment. You get a comment from the conductor, less, more, this kind of thing, different color, and you have to take things on and off, And so the ability to safely and quickly do that is going to be huge for us. It really is.
I remember particularly the discussion of the steps. The steps were in, they were out. It really took engineering to figure out how to kind of have them as retractable without being mechanical.
Right.
And so the efficiency of that, I think, is a great addition. And you led that.
I remember having an entire meeting of the entire group, all of us just on the steps,
Yep.
and going back and forth. There was an issue of headroom, I think, because
Right.
of the coral terrace above, and how are we going? The company making the lift? Could we put the mechanics, the mechanism below in the place where we can make this happen? Eventually, I think they obviously figured out how to make that happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to serve us and the future me, whoever that's going to be later on as time goes on. So I'm really happy that came to fruition.
Richard, you were really key in terms of designing the risers. And Raphael had a concept, and the orchestra had a concept of them being kind of not straight across, but curved in a way that the orchestra can hear and also see each other.
So we went through a lot of designs, and we should start with what we started with, which was just temporary platforms with adjustable legs. And they were placed on stage, and that made everything very awkward for a lot of people who were at edges and couldn't move comfortably and couldn't see the conductor. So when the first rendition of the risers were brought in, they were not curved at all. And I remember that first meeting with Raphael and the committee, we talked about, well, can we position ourselves, can we make the risers wider so that we could at least turn in somewhat of a curve? But it didn't really work. We went through so many renditions, just like the stairs that Greg mentioned. I can remember one time they had stairs that adjusted automatically each step of the way. But now we just have regular mechanical, solid stairs. So we've gone through lots of revisions. What we ended up with is a curved structure that works very well for sight lines and hearing, I think. The stage size itself really does not work to our advantage. It's a small stage, and I think we're utilizing it as best we can given the size of the stage. I think the design ended up very nicely.
One thing to note about the stage is that we could not make it larger. We would have loved to have made it deeper, but that would only be accomplished by going forward and the sight lines from the balcony, you would miss the first rows of the strings and the conductor. So we did add the choral terrace, which means you never lose space now if there's a chorus, where we'd have to push forward in the old configuration.
Right. And Backstage, having a choral terrace where the chorus actually can be in a separate space from the orchestra, we had so many problems backstage just maneuvering and with the instruments and the chorus all in the same space. So many improvements.
Well, I know the two of you have been able to stand on the stage and look out at the audience area. And we've talked before that the side walls were brought in and the back wall has been brought significantly forward. How are you anticipating that feeling when the audience comes in?
Yeah, just standing there and looking out, there's just no question about it. You feel closer to, where the audience is going to be. And of course, with the audience behind you, and that feeling of they're closer in front and now they're looking at you from behind, it's going to be a totally different feeling on the stage. And the audience is part of the performance, absolutely. There's an energy you get from them, there's energy you're putting out as you play, and it's a two-way thing. And so there's just no question in my mind that, they're going to feel closer, they're going to, hear us closer, and we're going to feel connected to everything that they're experiencing, as we play.
Absolutely. Visually, it's stunning how intimate it feels from the stage. Bringing the walls closer made a huge difference, but it's also the seating configuration. The feeling before was almost cavernous. It was just one big room, sort of. There were some aisles, but now you really feel that each seat is connected to the stage. So from the audience perspective, it's going to be enormously different. And then add the acoustic advantages that we'll have. It's going to be a whole different experience.
So let's turn to acoustics a bit.
Sure.
First of all, on the main floor at the back, now each row is raised above the next. So if you can see the stage, you can hear the stage better. Before it was all flat. So that's one enhancement. Paul Scarborough has done many renovations as well as new halls. Yeah. And he has this idea of the differentiation of the back wall and the sound panels above, which you've also had an opportunity to see. Yeah. What is your expectation of that?
So my understanding is that, we have there's this mesh material, but the actual wall is something like 36 inches in back of that. So whereas we used to have this wooden temporary shell where the canopy was too low, we'll call it, when you were up against the shell, you just got this immediate sort of, reflection of your own sound, and you couldn't hear anybody else really at that point, and it was just very live, and now as I looked up, you can see, the acoustical panels up above are much higher, right? And the actual architectural permanent shell is, this distance beyond. So when you're standing at the very back next to the mesh, you're not really at the shell. It's further back. So I really believe that we'll be able to not only make full use of the space we have back there, but when we're standing, it's not going to feel like we're getting this immediate reflection off of what we're playing. Is what just visually looking at it. That's what it sort of feels, I think, on the stage.
And on stage, Paul likes to talk about a lot of the details of, sound envelopes and which reflection you're hearing. But it makes a huge difference to what we hear on stage. I can remember on stage before, I'd be looking at the violins and I would see their bow move before I would hear it. And you have to play to what you hear. You also have to play to what you see, because the conductor doesn't make any noise. So I think with Paul's expertise in designing the panels and tuning the panels, and the back wall, which makes an enormous difference to what reflections of sound we hear, I think we're going to hear so much better amongst ourselves, and that's going to really pay off to the audience because they'll get a better performance.
Backstage, you arrive for work. You arrive to be prepared. The backstage space was minimal. There's no place to unpack, really. It was painted black because it was a temporary shell, so the light would be, you could see through it. And now there's more space, but it's also more well constructed so that you can move more freely, store your instruments more safely, and there are rehearsal rooms.
So everything is improved. The flow of traffic backstage is enormously improved. It's still tight. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not like some halls that are very large and have so much space to spare. We don't have any space to spare. Right. But now the backstage pass-through from one side of the stage to the other is so much wider, even with tables that can be let down for violins and cases and wind instruments. We have so much better access backstage. When someone has to turn the corner, it's not like you're just going to run into an instrument without knowing it. It's like those restaurant doors where the waitresses go back and forth. So everything's improved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And the lighting backstage is so much improved.
I just think during a performance when the lights are basically out back there and you're walking with an instrument, if you're not playing on stage yet, it just, the feeling of it kind of makes you tense. And this feels like an open, safe, supportive area.
And with a real shell that doesn't let light through, we can actually have light.
Right, that's right. And sound. You can have a conversation. That is a very solid wall, concrete wall behind you. That's now the back of the stage. So.
No, before when someone would be walking from one side of the stage to the other while we're performing, we could often hear it.
Yeah. That's the past. And you have two percussion spaces, one for storage and also for another for setup.
That's so completely right. So previously, we essentially had this hallway, I'll call it closet hallway or something, over on stage left, and which is not the side of the stage where we play. And so every time we needed something, we exit, walk all the way to the other side, try to find if we could even walk in the room. On some days, stands, audio equipment, things would be stored in there because there was nowhere to put anything. And now we actually have a dedicated percussion room on the side of the stage where we play that we can walk in, and our trunks that we created can roll right in there, and it's a much shorter distance to carry equipment. It's better for us. It's better that we'll have less likely to run into somebody carrying an expensive string instrument or something like that. And then downstairs in the basement, not only do we have a second percussion storage room, we actually have a percussion practice room. So previously we had a set of Wenger practice rooms, and these were basically these modular practice rooms that can be made at whatever size that you like. We had two small ones and one large one. The larger one was often used for storage, so it wasn't very useful for practicing. And so now we can go down, take equipment down there, set something up, practice it. It'll help us immensely. Until that time, the first time we saw setups was at the first rehearsal, and that's not really the best time to try to learn your part.
And people might not understand that oftentimes you'll have instruments that you don't have at home.
Right.
If you want to practice them, you need to come to the hall.
That's right. Yeah, there's so many. We have hundreds of pieces of gear, and it's all basically here in our trunks and in storage. And the only place really to practice it is really in the building.
Let's think of other spaces. We've talked about the library, the backstage space. We can talk about the entrance off of 8th Avenue, which is elegant and has an elevator. It's a nicer way to come into the building.
Yeah.
So the downstairs lounge for the musicians is where we spend our breaks. So at rehearsals and concerts, when there's an intermission, a lot of us will go downstairs, have coffee, have conversation. We won't talk about what people do down there after concerts, but it's very important. This is home to us. Our hall is our home. So it's important that people feel at ease there. And the setup with the locker rooms, the restrooms, has been improved immensely. I keep saying immensely, but that's what it is.
One of the things I'm excited about as well is that the former pit is where the keyboard instruments are stored. And previously there was no temperature control or humidity control, which is not good for any instrument. But now it's a sealed area that, so we can really maintain the instruments we have.
And we should explain that when we moved into the Fox Theater originally, it was actually a pit, which we sometimes played in. And since we've had the piano lift, that took up the pit space. So we're really not in the business of having a pit orchestra anymore. It's really a symphony hall now.
Richard, you were here when the orchestra moved into the Fox Theater.
I was.
And there wasn't a temporary back shell.
So when we first renovated the hall, we didn't really have a shell. We had what they called a curtain of acoustic beads, and you could actually see through them, and that gives you some inkling of how well they worked. And shortly after we moved in, they were thrown away and I think never to be seen again. But luckily, Dr. Jacobs, who was a board member at the time, funded an actual shell. It's what we call a movable shell because we rented the hall for other uses, so that the shell could be taken away in pieces. But it was actually an acoustic shell and improved the experience for the audience and the orchestra immensely. The shell that we have now is basically a concrete wall that isn't going anywhere, and it contains the sound and projects it into the audience chamber as a shell is supposed to do. So now I think we're going to hear really what the orchestra produces on stage in the audience.
One of the challenges of this site that the hall is built on is the backside of it is on a hill. And I remember sitting in the audience and thinking, what is that noise? And it would be skateboarders coming down the hill. I mean, you really could feel the vibration. Yeah. Now it's sealed, it's water sealed, so there's no, we used to have a bucket in the conductor's room to catch the rainwater, what little rain we had at that point. The rain we've had in the last 2 years has proven that this is a solid and sound building now, but we are constrained in terms of, as you said, in terms of the size of the building. It is a fixed square that isn't movable north, east, south, or west. So, but these improvements, a beautiful way of entering now. The stage door is elegant with an elevator. Again, safety has been a concern all the way through. You mentioned Dr. Jacobs and the demountable shell, as they call it. And Paul Scarborough was on the team that designed that. So he's been closely familiar with this building for 31 years, as he was remembering the other day. So.
And we should mention along with that, as part of that renovation, I think it was at that time, the balcony, if you sat under the balcony, there was a real problem. And they tried using speakers to enhance the sound under the balcony. Those never really worked that well, and they fell into disuse. And with the back wall coming forward, I've talked to Paul about this, and he loves talking about the improvements he made back there and the walls coming in. And we used to be able to hear a very intense reflection of sound on stage. Mm-hmm. There was actually glass on the back wall for the sound room, and if they didn't have the curtains drawn, if we played something, we would have right back at us, a split second later, we would hear at the wrong time what we didn't want to hear. So now we don't need those speakers, and I really think the audience is going to hear just as well from the back of the hall on the ground floor under the balcony as anywhere in the hall.
Me too. So a lot of what we've talked about today is the experience of you as musicians on the stage, but you've also talked about the fact that your connection with our audiences and their enhanced experience is going to be an important, critical component of this. So as we look at our community, You know, we welcome young people, we welcome our longtime subscribers, we look forward to new audiences. How would you like to express your excitement at having them come to this new hall, to this new home?
Yeah, I think post-renovation, the hall is going to just be an incredible place to listen and to see live music. And the last 4 years has really, I think, shown and taught at least me that there's no replacement for live music. You know, we spend a lot of time looking at screens all day, and being in the room with musicians, you know, playing at that moment in this what is going to be an incredible acoustic, one that'll be adjustable for all these different situations, for live films, for, you know, rock and roll, you know, classical music. The energy of being in there in the hall with the orchestra or the band or whatnot is just going to be incredible. And so I hope the community will take the opportunity to come, you know, experience, you know, what that's going to be.
And I agree that just like with the Rady Shell, we saw many new audience members come back because it was a great experience. And I think we're going to see all of our past subscribers clamoring to have live music back in an indoor setting, and they'll be coming back. But I think it's going to attract new audience, and we really want to see new audience. It's such a more inviting place than it used to be. I think it's not intimidating, it's very inviting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing new audiences and having them return many times.
One of the things that I only can imagine from the renderings is the lighting of this hall. And we're going to talk about that in another episode. But this feeling of just sort of the glow and the warmth and highlighting all of these great architectural details of the hall that were always there, and the color in the ceiling, which most people could not really read or experience. I can't wait the first time someone walks in to just feel this glow of the architecture and then this glorious sound. I think those two combined are what I'm most looking forward to.
And let's not forget stage lighting, because our old stage lighting was all downlit, and it did not make us look good on stage. And hopefully our faces will be seen from the audience now, our smiling faces, hopefully, and it'll be a better experience for the audience.
We have all these unique places also for seating, and I'm hoping people are going to buy tickets in various areas, because I really think that the various seating areas are going to have excellent sound, and it'll be fun to sit in different places, including the choral terrace when there's no chorus, and sitting behind the orchestra. We have about 90 seats back there. There's also some boxes up in what we call the angel walks, way up, way high, and with great sight lines, and also some seating very close and on stage level on the floor. So we have a variety of places where people can experience the orchestra in different ways. So here we are, a few months away from the opening, but what will you always remember about the planning for this?
Well, to me, the progression of the risers was memorable. We early on had a design that I don't think would have worked, and we had many iterations, but we insisted that we tape the stage at the Rady shell with the configuration. We couldn't make the elevations, but we actually put tape down with the first planned riser system, and it didn't work at all. It would have been disastrous had we gone with that. And it got revised, and we taped it again. And again, there were changes that we made that improved it. That wasn't as disastrous the second time, but I'm glad we went through that process, because I think now we have something that will at least be livable and improves the situation.
And the good thing is that the entire orchestra was involved in the process, so they knew where their chair was, where their seating was, and participated. So that bodes well for the success of that. Do you have a memory, Greg?
You know, the first time we actually walked in during the construction, And I had the realization, because this was all planned really just, on Zoom essentially. it was a pandemic project. And then to put your eyes on the physical, what you saw on a screen, I was just completely blown away that, one, that, I kind of remembered looking at it on a screen, and there it is in front of me, and further that, this thing that, came to be was really just, planned. Like during the pandemic, and these meetings we had, essentially, that all together, and yeah, I just remember just being shocked at how much it resembled what we saw on the page or on the screen. So that was a real eye-opening moment, I think, for me.
It's been great to see it come to fruition. We're almost there, certainly down to finishes.
And the orchestra just can't wait to be on stage again.
Yeah, we can't wait to hear you again. So audiences are coming back to this hall, and in this interim, of course, we are fresh still, approaching our 4th season at the Radio Shell at Jacobs Park, which has also welcomed more audiences. And, what do you want them to know in terms of?
So I think that one of the things that will be very important to me at the Jacobs Music Center is to see new audiences. And we saw at the Radio Shell, new audiences come in. Of course, our past subscribers came back many times because of the enhanced experience. But we saw new people and new audiences come back and come back. And I think we're going to see the same thing at the Jacobs Music Center, where our old subscribers will have a much enhanced experience, but we're going to see new people come first just to see what it is. And it's so inviting that they'll be coming back and back.
Thank you, Greg and Richard, for not only for being here today and sharing this, but really, as I said earlier, for putting so much heart and thought into the construction of the plan to realize the dream. I know you're going to be pleased, and I want you to know you had a lot to do with it, so thank you. And lastly today, we are excited. In a few weeks, we'll be sharing with you the 24-25 season, opening season at Jacobs Music Center. It is going to be an exciting one we've long awaited, and the wait is worth it. We can't wait to see you there and to welcome you as our audiences to this new era of the San Diego Symphony Orchestra.